You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. In 2 Corinthians 4, 5 through 11. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show us that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. For we who live are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus also may be manifested in our mortal flesh.
The passage says that we are the light of the world. Well, what does that look like? There was a time in America where most people identified as Christians. If you wanted to get anywhere in business, you joined a church. That was a place where you could find community. In a normal conversation, you would be asked, "So what church do you go to?" That was normal conversation many years ago, but those days are long gone. I think the last statistic I saw about Greenville is that 74% of Greenvillians, if you say it that way, or Greenvillites, do not go to church at all. So it used to be that to be the light of the world, you would simply present the gospel to people, and you could use the Christian vocabulary because it was well understood. So you could ask someone, suppose you were to die tonight and you were to stand before God and he were to say to you, "Why should I let you into my heaven?" What would you say? That was a very effective question. But that question assumes a number of things. It assumes you believe in God, at least the Christian God, which less and less people are. And it assumes you believe in heaven, which many, many people do not believe in. So, what does it look like for us to be the light of the world? I'm certainly not going to be exhaustive here, and I'm not even going to treat the Matthew passage. I read it as a background, so we would see it as a background. What I want to treat is the 2 Corinthians passage, and I think it gives us some clues. So I want to look at three things in this passage. Number one, life isn't about us. Number two, life is about His glory in us. Number three, brokenness lets His light shine through us. Okay, so those three. Life isn't about us. Life is about His glory in us. And number three, brokenness lets His light shine through us. So let's look at the first one. Life isn't about us. Verse 5. For what we proclaim is not ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, with ourselves as your servants for Jesus' sake. So in the Christian worldview, there are two ways to live. You live with Jesus being Lord, proclaiming Jesus as Lord, not just saying it, but following Him, or you don't. You follow your own way, your own thoughts about how life should work. You follow your own intuitions, your own knowledge, your own education, your own whatever. These are the two ways that we can approach it. So what does it look like to follow your own way, your own lordship, as it were? There was a marketing piece at a gym in Portland, Oregon, and this is what it said. It was actually for the new year. It says the new year's right around the corner, and you're either going to own the year or the year is going to own you. It's 100% your choice. It's in your hands. That's the first thing. Simply by taking all of the responsibility and putting it on your shoulders, you become empowered. Next, you take that feeling of empowerment, of invincibility, the feeling you can run through a wall, and you take action. You take action like you've never taken action before. You become prolific, you become consistent, and you let no obstacle stand in your way, no matter what. No more pity parties, no more whining about anything. You are in control, you. So there's something about that that's really attractive, isn't it? Take control of your life. There are certain things that are good about that. Take charge of your life, become a better you, just do it. Anybody heard that slogan? Or did I just come up with that? Did I just come up with that? Oh no, that's Nike, that's right. They could use me on their marketing staff, couldn't they? I just have all these ideas flowing all the time. So, there are plenty of ways to make this happen, or that this happens in our culture. You do you, invest in yourself, get everything you can out of life, be who you want to be, make sure your relationships benefit you, including the sexual ones, pursue your dreams. If you don't like who you are, change who you are. You can just change. You can do whatever you want. So there are all kinds of things, and you can, there's so many things to say that way, and I don't want to go into all that. But the truth is, I don't think our culture is any happier, and we've talked about this before. There's never been more anxiety. There's never been more anger. There's never been more anxiousness than we have today in America. I don't think it's working. I don't think it works if you just look at it. But that's our culture out there. What's more troubling is that this kind of mentality has made its way into the church, into the evangelical church, you might say. Well, there are famous pastors that are writing books like Your Best Life Now, or 8 Steps to Creating the Life You Want, or Walking in Prosperity, and many others. And the idea is that you can have it all. You can have happiness, wealth, the fulfillment of your dreams, and that somehow this is God's will for your life. So if you are suffering, somehow you're out of God's will. And we see this in churches all the time. Maybe not, that's more of the prosperity gospel, but I think it's more widespread than just the churches that buy into a prosperity gospel kind of a paradigm. People are drawn to churches that have their act together. Their children's program is slick. Their recovery programs, teaching programs, counseling programs, great music, great teaching, everything works great, and people are drawn to that like flies. Brokenness is minimized, messiness and messy people are marginalized. Making people feel comfortable is a high priority. Feeling fulfilled is a high priority. Feeling worthy is a high priority. And then you come to the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is a clarion call to die. That's not that popular. It's not that popular. From one of my mentors, and I've quoted him many times, Dave McCarty, comes this: the gospel is bad news to the accomplished Christian in business, ministry, politics, amateur sports, academia, whatever. It's bad news to the Christian good at a hobby, good at parenting, good at leadership in the church, good at whatever makes you feel good about yourself or makes you feel worthy. The gospel is bad news to you because it says that your worthiness or somebodyness is filthy rags. The gospel is bad news to believers with something to lose. The Spirit uses the gospel to expose you to yourself for the fraud you are. You claim to treasure Jesus and his imputed worthiness, but what you really treasure is your own worthiness. You find Jesus and his imputed worthiness unsatisfying, and that's why you have idols in your life. And the biggest idol of them all is your own worthiness. It's pride, not humility. But once you are exposed for the fraud you are, there's hope, because Jesus came for frauds, for failures, for losers. You qualify for grace because of your failure to find contentment in Jesus and his imputed worthiness, needing nothing else. All else is sinking sand. This problem you have is the leaven of the Pharisees that Jesus exposed. The Pharisees imagined themselves followers of God, but they were frauds, just like you and I. Think I'm being extreme? Consider how you would feel about yourself if tonight you lost everything: job, health, relationships, home, cars, savings, bank cards, your precious reputation, and you became a single homeless person with 0 friends under a bridge. Would Jesus be enough for you? If he would, then you're no fraud. Dave and so many others are frauds. Thankfully, Jesus' love extends to frauds. Accomplishments, somebodyness, reputation, success is not bad, but it's very dangerous. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, Jesus said. Brothers and sisters, we've made our lives and our worthiness about us. And there's been little room for Jesus to actually be Lord and let him decide. See, to be the light of the world begins with letting Jesus be Lord, letting him be the one through whom we find our worthiness and our worth. Number 2, life is about his glory in us. Verse 6, for God who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," has shone in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. The light has shined into our hearts. Ouch. Most of us might not think that that's such a good thing. Think back on your life. What if everything you have ever done gets exposed? How would you feel? Perhaps you might be devastated. See, the way the light shines, it's like being in a court of law where the prosecuting attorney is reading off a list of the charges against you. You know right well that you have committed all of these things, but you engage in a campaign of denial because it's too painful. The proof is overwhelming that you are guilty, and the prosecutor lays out an ironclad case against you, and yet you still deny. It's too painful, it's too scary, would rather live in blind bliss. See, this is what the light of God shining into our hearts might feel like, because it exposes very, very deeply. And this is why many people reject the gospel or invent a parallel version of the gospel that feels better, that's a lot more like success as a Christian. So let's look at this idea of the glory of God. It says there in verse 6, the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Jesus Christ. What does that glory look like? Well, there's all kinds of aspects to glory, and I'm not going to cover it here in the next 2 minutes. But glory is all over the scriptures. The glory of God is everywhere. We might think of some scary places like in Isaiah 6, where the seraphim are around the throne room and they're saying, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory." And the threshold shakes. There's so much power, so much brightness, so much glory there that everything shakes. And we know what Isaiah's response was. He fell on his face. He thought he was dead. He could not stand the scrutiny of that glorious light. Or we might look at glory as what it says in Psalm 24. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord mighty in battle. He's a warrior, this God. That's his glory comes with him. That sounds scary too, because we don't stand up to the scrutiny of it. Now, of course, these are all part of the glory of God, his holiness and his power. But the verse says something else, and I want us to look at this. It says, the light of the knowledge of the glory of God, and here's the phrase, in the face of Jesus. In the face of Jesus. Now that changes everything. How so? How does that change everything? Well, the face of Jesus is that he entered into a broken, dark world and submitted himself to brokenness, strife, and suffering. He left the splendors of heaven. He limited his knowledge and his understanding to be born as a baby in poverty. He suffered the indignities of this life, sickness, tiredness, the brokenness of everyone around him, including his parents and his siblings, and difficulty in life in making a living. He had to subject himself to that. All the difficulties that we face, he submitted himself to. But it went far beyond that, of course. You know that. He submitted himself to die. He was born to die. He allowed them to take him and beat him and submit him to torture and then hang him on a cross. So say what you want about the glory of God, and yes, it includes all those great attributes. He's a warrior God. His glory is unfathomable. The light is unfathomable. But we also look at the face of Jesus, who gave it all and submitted himself to indignities, even death on a cross for our sakes, and that in itself is glory. That is glorious. Mercy is glorious. And so if we want to understand his glory, we have to understand that for any of us to have any hope at all, his glory must shine in our hearts and expose the darkness. This is a little bit how the gospel works. Let's go back to our courtroom analogy. So you have the prosecuting attorney, who's the Holy Spirit, and he's there making a list of all of our wrongs, and he presents them to the Father, who's the judge. But then, as we begin to look a little bit closer on this picture, we hear all of the things being listed, and we identify, yes, that's who I am. That's who I am. That's who I am. But then we begin to realize something. We begin to realize that our name is no longer being identified with my list. Our name is not being identified with anymore. In fact, it's Jesus' name that's there, and the offenses that I have given have been assigned to Jesus. They've been assigned to him over and over and over. Another one, another one, another one. And there he is. He's being accused of my evil, of my sin. He's being accused, and his name is there. He is getting the blame for me. See, for Jesus to shine his glory into our hearts means that he became sin for us. He became identified with our sin, and he took it upon himself. Do you want to know how to be a shining light? Far from running from who we are, or stuffing it down, or acting like it doesn't exist, or acting like we've got it all together because this is what we think is what it is to be a shining light in the world. We've got to act with people around us like we have it together because we are Christians after all. Far from that. The reality is we just admit brokenness because it's in brokenness that his light shines and Jesus gets the glory. And it becomes about him and not about us. It's about how great he is. Number 3, brokenness lets his light shine through us. So we'll just put it where the rubber meets the road. Let's take the question that Dave McCarty asked. Is Jesus enough? What if everything were taken away from us? Would he be enough? So here's the beautiful thing about God shining the light of the glory of Christ into our hearts. It actually means that he will not let us stay in the darkness and make life about ourselves. See, once he's begun this work in us, he begins to shine light in very dark places, and we begin to see it. But here's how he does it. He does it through suffering in adverse circumstances. This is the way he does it. We begin to get a sense of our own self-centeredness when things don't go our way. If things are not going your way, maybe it's Jesus. It just might be Jesus knocking at your door. See, this is what he does when he shines his light in the darkness. He makes us go through stuff that we don't like at all. Sure, the adverse circumstances and suffering are due to the darkness of people around us. They cause all those things, but all of it is used in God's economy for his people to show us his glory. That's what he does. But brothers and sisters, we are so allergic to this suffering. Well, it's no wonder we are, because our whole culture is allergic to suffering. In his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, Tim Keller states that modern Western culture has no real category for suffering. This is what he writes. Dr. Paul Brand, a pioneering orthopedic surgeon in the treatment of leprosy patients, spent the first part of his medical career in India and the last part of his career in the United States. He wrote, "In the United States, I encountered a society that seeks to avoid pain at all costs. Patients lived at a greater comfort level than any I had previously treated, but they seemed far less equipped to handle suffering and far more traumatized by it." And Keller asks, why? He says that the short response is that the other cultures have provided its members with various answers to the question, what is the purpose of human life? So different responses, and I'm summarizing here, different responses from those cultures say that it's either karma or it's enlightenment or it's to live with a life of virtue or nobility and honor and many other things. Well, Keller continues, the crucial commonality is this. In every one of these worldviews, suffering can, despite its painfulness, be an important means of actually achieving your purpose in life. It can play a pivotal role in propelling you toward all the most important goals. One could say that in each of these other cultures' grand narratives, what human life is about, suffering can be an important chapter or part of that story. But modern Western culture is different. In the secular view, this material world is all there is, and so the meaning of life is to have the freedom to choose the life that makes you most happy. However, in that view of things, suffering can have no meaningful part. It is a complete interruption of your life story. It cannot be a meaningful part of the story. In this approach to life, suffering should be avoided at almost any cost or minimized to the greatest degree possible. See, the way of the gospel is to expose darkness by the light of Christ. Do we see how even in the church, not just in our culture, but even in the church, we have bought into this way of thinking that somehow we minimize suffering, we maximize fulfillment, that life is about your best life, that we should really be comfortable, and that comfort is God's blessing on our lives. You see how wrong-headed that really is. But here's the thing about suffering. It's caused by the darkness, and so it needs the same antidote that the darkness needs. It needs the light of Christ. That's what suffering needs. It doesn't need to be minimized. It needs to be exposed by the light of Christ. So what we do is we press into brokenness and let Jesus shine, because he's the only one that can bring healing from our own endless search for self-worth. That's the ultimate search, isn't it? I want to be worthy. So when we look at the life of Paul, We see this super saint, at least I think we think that way. But his Christian maturity came with a price, right? It was a life of suffering. That's what it was. It was a life of suffering and pressing in to Jesus. And that's what we have right here in our passage. So let me just go through these verses quickly. Verse 7, but we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. That's such a verse of contrast. It's the amazing part of the gospel. See, jars of clay in those days were throwaways. They were not important. They weren't pretty. They didn't look nice. They cracked easily. When one went bad, you just threw it away. They were nothing. And what he's doing is he's comparing that to us. We are being compared to jars of clay because we're cracked. We're not particularly pretty. We're self-centered. We're fragile, and we're full of darkness. That's what the truth is. We're broken people. But here's the glory of the gospel. That it is in these throwaway containers that he has decided to place his treasure. He has decided to put the light of his glory inside these fragile, broken vessels. He actually comes to live in us. So, what is the treasure? He says it in verse 10, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. We carry the gospel or Jesus with us because it is Jesus that changes everything in our lives. It is the gospel that brings us worthiness or worth. Yes, even with all of the things that it exposes in us. It puts all the darkness to death. And it brings us this new light of Christ that becomes our life. It becomes the very reason we exist. And yet we flirt with the darkness all the time. All the time. So how does it work? Well, Paul gives us these contrasts, right? He gives us these contrasts. Verse 8, he says, we're afflicted, but not crushed. So this word for affliction, he had been beaten, he had been stoned and left for dead, he'd been imprisoned, he'd been shackled, he'd been spoken of falsely, he had been persecuted through life. So many things happened to him. But through it all, he says, the surpassing power of God in the face of Christ had sustained him. He wasn't crushed by it. The next one, perplexed, but not driven to despair. Brothers and sisters, this is the one I identify with the most. Perplexed, to be confused, to be in a confused state of mind, to be at a loss, to be in doubt, to be uncertain. Why do we always have to have all the answers for everything? Why can't we be perplexed and just not know? We don't know. Why is this happening to me? I don't know. I'm just as perplexed as you are. I'm just as confused. I don't know what he's doing. This is a hard situation, and I don't know what to do about it. But then he says, but I'm not in despair. And why is he not in despair? Because his trust and his confidence is in the light of Christ. See, the whole thing about following our own way is that I've got to have my act together and know everything that's happening to me and figure it all out. The way of Christ is I don't need to know anything. I have quieted my heart, says the Psalms, for things that are too big for me, that are too important for me, that are too out there, that I can't understand. I have quieted my heart. Why? Because I can trust in the one who made me and who leads me and who is the Lord of all things. It's okay to be perplexed. Persecuted but not forsaken. Same idea. Persecuted. He knew, though, that he was not alone. That's the key. He knew that he was not alone. Struck down, but not destroyed. He was alive to tell the story. He was indestructible until the day that God decided to take him. And that's the case for you. You are indestructible until the day that God decides to take you home, so you can be persecuted, you can be beaten down, you can be perplexed about everything that is going on, but you are in rock solid hands. Brothers and sisters, we've raised our expectations way too high about what this life is supposed to give us. That somehow we're supposed to get our comfort and we're supposed to get our comfortable lives together. That the world is about us. Somehow we've gotten this idea and we have minimized what is coming. That the most glorious thing is coming. In every one of the New Testament writers, they had a massive perspective of the future, of what was coming, and they lived their lives today with the perspective of the future. We've gotten them reversed. So suffering is to press us into Jesus. Do you want to be the light of the world? There's nothing more beautiful than when a suffering Christian presses into Jesus. It's the road to joy. The Rostek family's been through a lot lately. Their daughter-in-law, Stacy, has a brain tumor. There have been a number of other issues in the family as well. So one of their daughters, Becky, has been walking for a while now with one of her best friends. And I won't give you her name. I'm going to call her Jenny for our purposes here. But Jenny went through untold suffering before she just recently died of cancer. And she left 3 little children behind. So Becky walked that entire journey with her, praying for her healing, believing that God would heal her. So Jenny's cancer journey was awful, but it was made so much worse because partway on the journey, her husband died. So when she died, she left 3 children as orphans. Becky wrote a reflection about Jenny after she died. Perplexed would be the word to use for that. And Colleen Rostek read that to us at our small group this week, and I asked her if I could use it. Let me read this. I've been shallow and worldly and weak-minded by assuming the only way of redemption for Jenny is healing from cancer. Why am I still living with my heart on this earth? Redemption is you, Jesus. You are the gift. Heaven is redemption. Heaven is healing. Why would I look to the world for healing or look for you to heal in this world? The glory awaiting Jenny is beyond my wildest comprehension. Why would I want second best for her? Second best is earthly redemption. God's best is heavenly redemption. I think I'm just so small-minded. I can't grasp eternity. I can't grasp heaven. I can't grasp that Jenny's good and your glory might not be here. Why would it be here? You tell us over and over this is not our home. We're foreigners here. Why do I want her redemption on foreign ground? I don't know your plan, but I trust your plan. I trust it is for the greater good of the kingdom. I trust that you see all and know all and will never, ever forsake us. I trust that you love Jenny's 3 children. You handpicked them for greatness. You chose them to be the children of great suffering, and that breaks my earthly heart. But I know that I don't have the mind of God. I don't understand. I don't need answers. I just need to lean into you. You are the answer. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. That's the glory of Christ. And that impacts people all over the place. It's the gospel, and it changes everything. Let's pray.